Division, sitting in Pretoria, has reserved judgment in a high-profile legal battle over the final resting place of former Zambian President Edgar Lungu. Whilst his family presses to bury him privately in South Africa, honouring his alleged wishes, the Zambian government insists on the repatriation for a state funeral with full honours in Lusaka, citing national interest and precedent. Now, this case raises thorny legal and constitutional questions, from the rights of the next of kin to the power of state protocol. Well, to help us unpack the legal and political dimensions, we're now joined by legal analyst Mpumelelo Zikalala. Mpumelelo, good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us. What a fascinating case this is, isn't it? And it's unlikely we'll ever have one similar again.
Good morning to you, and also good morning to your viewers. And it's a groundbreaking case, a case in which we are now extending the jurisprudence in terms of the laws and what is it that should apply when it comes to matters such as these ones. And I don't think it's going to be very rare to find another statesman or former statesman whose body is going to be fought in the manner in which it's being done now, especially when it's two African countries fighting and saying, this is what we want. So it's a battle between the family and the battle between the country, and what type of laws ought to apply, because you are dealing with two different countries. So it is a groundbreaking case, one in which jurisprudence is going to be extended to quite a lot. And I think even the Constitutional Court is going to have a bite at it at a later stage, depending on who wins in this latest battle. But definitely the Court may be the final arbiter in the matter moving forward.
So let's go to the Constitutional Court, because I guess in the end, what's really being decided is, Section 36, limitations of rights, where the greater good is what supersedes personal rights. Lukai Toby, though, says that Edgar Lungu has no rights because he's dead.
And it falls upon that. Maybe let's look at it in this context. And if you go to court, you're basically saying, I want to enforce my rights and I want to be protected by the Constitution of South Africa. Now, if you are no longer alive, that means the rights in which you have are very limited. Basically, it's just respect over your body and nothing else. But the persons who are going to have much more rights or much more activities or much more authority in terms of your body is your family. But in this case, we were different to a unique matter in that it's not only the family, but it's also the government of Malawi that is saying, we want to be part and parcel of whatever which is happening. So that's where things are going to come in, and where things are going to be very interesting in terms of developing our jurisprudence and saying, what are those rights? How do they extend to? When do they start and when do they end? When they've ended, who is the next of kin which is giving more precedence, or that is giving more authority in terms of that particular limitation? Is it the government? Is it the family? Is it the spouse? Is it the children? And let's afford all of those and give them the weight in which they deserve, so that they can be able to decide what is it that should happen. Ordinarily, for example, if I were to die, it would be my spouse that would decide what is happening, regardless of what my family is stating. So if that has been determined in jurisprudence, the same should be determined when it comes to former statesmen and what should happen to their bodies when they are no longer alive.
So when somebody dies in South Africa, South African law kicks in. It doesn't matter where that person is from, whether they're here illegally or legally, that doesn't matter. What matters is where he dies, South African law kicks in. Isn't that what should be happening right now? Or does the South African court have the right to hand over its right to another court in another country?
Basically, it's the understanding of saying that, yes, South African law would kick in terms of the rights which have accrued to that particular individual, but you can't ignore the jurisprudence which is happening in other countries and the unique facts and circumstances of this matter. In this case, we're not dealing with an ordinary person. You're dealing with a former statesman. So that means there are certain rights and certain rituals that have to be observed. There are certain jurisprudence which have to be taken over there. Maybe if the approach would have been, all that you want to do is that you want to repatriate the body to the country of origin. That's what we want to do. Maybe it would have been different, and then fight the issue of whether you have the right or the ability to bury once you're in that particular country. Things would have turned out a bit different. But because you've laid bare all the facts and all the disputes in which we are fighting now, of course, they're going to be adjudicated here. And the manner of adjudicating within the South African courts will be according to South African law and the rights which have then accrued to those individuals. Let's also remember there are a number of provisions in our constitution who do not say those rights only accrue to South African citizens. It says everyone. And the minute you say everyone, you include everyone, South African citizen, non-South African citizen, they are all included in order to be protected by South African law. And they have a right to go to a South African court and say, we want this dispute to be solved here because we have certain rights and we think those rights are being violated in the manner in which our country is dealing with this, the process.
I'm curious, can you leave it in your will that I don't want a certain person to be at my funeral?
Yes, you can. It's within the provision. It's within your rights. The only problem is, can you entrust individuals to be able to enforce what has been stated there? You can go and say, I, as the executor of the will, have been given strict instructions that Zikalala is not supposed to be there. So if Zikalala is coming and I've heard news that she's doing so, I can go to court and look for an agent interdict and request him not to come, or find ways in which I'm going to bar him from actually doing that. So it is a provision that you can leave it within the will, and it can be executed. Where it becomes a bit different is this. Would that same provision be able to survive if I was a statement? So you have the country of South Africa saying that you are a former president. Therefore, there are certain rights and certain procedures and certain customs that you've been accustomed to. Are those customs going to supersede your interest and the interest of your family and the instructions that you have left in the will? Simply put, what is the greater will or the greater intention of those things compared to what you have requested? Because you must have understood, when you signed up to be president, there are certain privileges which are going to go away. And one of those privileges is to choose what you want to do with your life, because your life no longer belongs to you alone, your family alone. Also, your country is also involved in the manner in which things are being done. So that's the type of jurisprudence in which this court will have to deal with.
Okay, so when you weigh all of this up, which side of the coin do you think is going to win? One gets a sense that the Kenneth Kaunda case maybe is the one that tips the scale a little bit.
I think this case, it may tip towards the side of the Malawian government, because I would say, let's look at what is happening. At the end of the day, you have to subscribe to what has been stated there. So it's up to the family as to what the family will do. But it's also going to be unique in the case of saying, where do you start and end? You can't say that a person belongs to the state even though they are no longer there. Or maybe let's look at the past instances or the past few months before the person died. Do you still think that the person had this allegiance toward that particular state with the certain privileges which are accrued? Those are all factors in which will need to be considered by the court. So if it was that closer to the end, everything was done correctly, there was no bad blood between the two entities or the two litigants in court, maybe one could consider and say the Malawian government could win. But there's a slight chance that the family could win, in terms of saying, let's look at the core of what was taking place and use that as a precedent to say, did they really have allegiance to him, or they only want to claim his body now because it's no longer alive?
Fascinating. Mpumelelo, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much indeed for giving us your thoughts on this very complex case.
Thank you very much for hosting.
All right, that was Mpumelelo Zikalala helping us unpack the latest developments in the Edgar Lungu burial dispute.
Parlez-vous couramment le français? Êtes-vous